because truly what we're seeing is people just reflecting the faithfulness that they feel from God. Lamentations is 3:22 and 23 is a very, very well-known verse. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassion never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. And that's just where I just have had so much fun experiencing God's faithfulness and seeing it through our humble givers and their faithfulness into God's work.
Welcome to the Generosity Now podcast, where we bring you inspiring stories of generosity and whole life stewardship. Our goal is to showcase individuals and organizations making a positive impact in our communities and across the globe. I'm your host, Eric Mose, president of the National Christian Foundation, Rocky Mountain Region, and I'm joined by my incredible co-host, Laurie Bossert. Laurie, how are you doing today?
It's a new year, and a new year, Eric, just gets me excited for new opportunities, so I'm doing really well.
That's so good. It is. It's a beautiful day here in sunny Colorado. We get to see the mountains again. And yesterday they were gone for a little bit. Well, we had some snow coming, some storms coming in, but beautiful day. And so today on the Generosity Now podcast, we want to do something a little bit different. Another little different one. We reviewed some of our highlights from last year, and now as we come back to the podcast and we start off the 2024 season, we actually wanted to take a break and of our normal way and look at NCF's Impact Report. And so Laurie and I are going to just go kind of back and forth on a couple things that we see, and we want to celebrate the work of you, our NCF givers, and so many others who have been faithful. NCF givers are truly some of the most generous people that I've ever met. And it's absolutely incredible. And when we get a look at the impact report that NCF National puts together, which takes all of the cumulative efforts of givers and charities and kind of gives us a highlight of what all's done, it's super encouraging. I know as we were flipping through it, Laurie, you and I were going back and forth and just talking, just like how humbling it is to see the generosity of the folks that we have the joy of walking alongside. And so we just want to highlight a little bit of this. We're also going to go ahead and put a link to the impact report in our show notes. And so if you want to dig in a little bit deeper and read some more about where NCF givers are giving to and the impact that they're making around the world, please go in the show notes, click that link and take a look at the impact report. 2023 was a unique year in our economy. There was a lot of ups and downs. There was a lot of volatility. We had different world crises, both natural disasters and increased wars and fighting and different. Clearly, we have the stuff that's happened that's continued to be in Ukraine and Russia, but then also in Israel with Hamas and. But then also other smaller skirmishes and issues in countries. We've seen coups and different things like that.
The Hawaii fires that really had a huge devastation to that state.
Absolutely. We've seen some of these huge impacts, and many of which would make people sometimes take a step back. Sometimes it's like the uncertainty of the day would make people hold things back more. And yet what we saw was, again, extravagant generosity.
Eric, I actually believe that there are a lot of people that really did feel the impact of the inflation. And that's what makes this even more amazing, is in that impact, they still made the choice to be faithful and give more away too.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great call out. Yeah, the impact on inflation was massive on many, many families. And yet they're still so generous. It makes me think about the Macedonian church that Paul commends, and absolutely love that. And so we want to just highlight some of the great work that we've seen done and some of the great impact. Over $2.1 billion with a B, billion, was granted out to charities and nonprofits this last year. That went to over 34,000 different charities supported. Over 34,000 different charities were supported. That's a record number. That's the highest number of charities in a single year that NCF givers have ever granted to. It's absolutely amazing.
And this just highlights that there are things that are close to all of our hearts, but none of us could even do 10% of this, of really being connected. And God is really working through so many different ministries. And there's also 58 different causes that we at NCF categorize these charities in. And I sit there and I just get amazed at how the variety of God has created these ministries, and also all of us givers, that we are all, our hearts are just sensitive to different things across the ministry. And that's one of the reasons why we at NCF don't really prescribe where to send the money. None of us would have the ability to know all of these ministries. And I am so excited to see the quantity of all that God is doing.
Yeah. And you talk about the quantity too. We also got just a little note. NCF has an internal site, and on that internal site there was a post earlier this week that said one day last week. So one day last week, we received over 1,200 security gifts. So that's the gifts of stock to come in to help fund those giving funds. That is the largest single day of receiving stock gifts that we've ever had in NCF in the number of different securities. And also, I think it might have been the same day, but also maybe another single day, we sent out over 6,282 grants to charities in just one day. 6,282 checks. The stack of checks that was in the picture was 1.5 feet high of checks, and that only represented about 2/3 of the checks, because over 1/3 of them went electronically too. And so just to think about that, like, holy cow, I guess NCF National needs to make sure they have a lot of ink on hand to process that many checks.
It is true.
But wow, it's just absolutely amazing.
It is absolutely amazing to see what, and it is true that a lot of people during this holiday, Christmas and New Year's season, that a lot of gifts do come into NCF. But that is also the hearts are to get the money to the ministries also, where all those grants were going out. It was really exciting to see. There is no doubt NCF national team is amazing at the quantity that they process here at year end.
Yeah, not to cast shade on other DAF providers or things like that, but NCF's mission is to mobilize resources by inspiring biblical generosity. That's what we long to do. Our vision is to see each and every person reached and restored by the love of Christ. But our mission is to mobilize resources. And so we are all about getting those funds out. We had a giver who reached out, and he was in the absolute crunch. It was the last day or so of the year, and he was trying to get a donation to a nonprofit here locally that really had a significant need before year end. And he's like, is there any way we can get this out in time? And he realized it was kind of last minute. And, and we said, hey, we'll do our best we can. We put it in the system. We put a rush, and that grant got sent out electronically the next day. It was in that nonprofit's account. And it was so good to see. And so it is something that if you're really passionate about seeing grants deployed, it's something that we love to do here at NCF. Hey, Laurie, tell us about what is the number one cause that NCF givers give to, has continued to be the same time and time again, year over year. And what is that?
It's our church. It's where we fellowship as believers, where we get enriched through the gospel, and where we can sit on weekends to fellowship with one another. It is amazing because $314 million went through NCF to local churches in 2023. That helped 7,765 congregations. That is phenomenal. And it's neat to see the quantity of churches, that church is still the number one place on our givers' hearts.
Yeah, absolutely. We both are the fans of the local church. We believe in the importance of the local church. We believe it's the bride of Christ is a beautiful thing, even with many blemishes and issues. And we bring our owns to the church, and yet it encourages me to no end to see that the number one grant recipient by volume by checks is local churches. And so that's super cool. You mentioned the wildfires, and we talked a little bit about some of the different disaster and humanitarian aid. There was over $131 million granted last year for disaster relief and humanitarian aid.
And you had mentioned a bunch of those different types of disasters that money went to. And we are all, especially when those disasters happen, there's a lot of times where we are mobilizing those resources to really be able to help the people today. I recognize that in Israel, there are still people that are not in homes because of what's going on there. And that is a continuation. And sometimes in those disaster reliefs, we need to remember that it can be a long time. Ukraine's been going on for a long time. And our givers have stepped up and done a lot in that space. It's really neat.
Yeah, and something that I continue to find very fascinating when I also talk with NCF givers is there's for many there is a desire to meet these humanitarian aid issues, or disaster issues on the forefront, at the very beginning. And then some things settle out for a little bit because a lot of times more different governmental aid kind of comes in to help and things like that. And so there's like this initial response and then a slowing down for a time. But many of them aren't saying but we're waiting. We're waiting for this situation to end so we can now bring and help rebuild, that we can help rebuild businesses and rebuild organizations and rebuild churches and families and things like that. And so I know in conversations that even when we look at that number of grants going out, we look at $131 million being dispersed. I know there's people that are holding back saying, yeah, but I'm really waiting for the Ukraine war to be over so I can go and make a significant infrastructural benefit there. We saw that with the Hawaii disasters. There was an initial response, but then there's many who are now coming in and actually using their charitable capital and make impact investments in organizations to get businesses restarted and get them flowing again. And so love to see how there's this trickle effect that once that disaster has initially been mitigated, that then there's this long-term support thing that then comes in behind the scenes.
And Eric, actually, I had the privilege of going to Haiti in November, and it's so close to my heart because the earthquake that happened in 2010 there, 2012, I was there at the hotel that was demolished, and Compassion had to rebuild 44 different school sites and program sites after that, and how much you can see that country has grown since that disaster. And they've had other disasters, but so often we see what Haiti hasn't grown. I got to have the privilege of seeing how Haiti has grown and some of that rebuilding and things being done that much better so that they wouldn't get demolished in the next disaster. Such a joy to see. And we do need to continue to help countries in those places of those disasters. And Japan just had an earthquake that was pretty significant.
Absolutely. Yeah, 7.5.
Some enormous number of after shocks also.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, be praying for the people of Japan. One thing that's really, really neat, as we think about these disasters and the support of NCF givers and the ministries that then go in, a lot of times it's these disasters that are actually the avenue for the gospel to progress the most. And so we actually saw after the tsunami that hit Thailand several years ago that it was the Christians organizations that came in that actually fueled the gospel progress through Thailand after the tsunami. And so on the heels of these disasters, oftentimes organizations like Samaritan's Purse and Compassion and World Vision, and so many more are given an open opportunity to come in. Places that previously would have had their hands out, they're like stiff arming, saying, no, you're not welcome, are now saying, yes, please, and thank you. And so as we think about that impact on humanitarian aid and disaster relief, over 23% of the funds that were granted out were sent for funding Great Commission organizations in the work of the progress of the gospel through evangelism and church ministry and discipleship and apologetics. Over $73 million was given for Bible translations. There's been such a great collaborative work in Bible translation work in the last several years, and that the Bible translations and the speed of which to get all of the last known Bible translations completed is amplifying significantly. And it is so encouraging, because these organizations are also working collaboratively for the first time in the last several years. There's been an effort to bring them to be very, very collaborative. And that's super encouraging to see that this 73 million isn't 3 different organizations all working on the same translation separately, not knowing and working together. Like no, like they've mapped it out, and there's a plan to get all the Bibles, all the known languages, to have a Bible or even a refreshed Bible in a very short period of time.
It is so important. Bible translation for many of us is such an important piece because the Scripture tells us that every person is going to have the opportunity to be able to read a Bible in their, and I just know that a lot of us really consider that to be a high priority. Yeah. And I love it. I love hearing how they are doing it together.
Yeah. And we know that God's word does not come back void, right? And so the emphasis on seeing the Bible continue to go out. We have a couple givers specifically who have said, hey, we younger couples, and they said, hey, we are committed to seeing the Bible translated in this people group. And so them and one of their friends that is in like a Bible study have jointly said, hey, we are going to ensure that this people get a Bible translation. So they've committed a 3-year plan to have that done. And so, as we even talk about the progress of the gospel, and, we would encourage you to even pray about, like, is there a place for maybe you and maybe a couple friends could gather together and take on one of those last people groups and get involved with one of the many incredible organizations doing great Bible translation work.
It's really neat. And, Eric, one of the people that we've had on our podcast earlier this year was Pete Oakes. And Pete is an example of our next topic of the $7.5 million that went to prison ministries. I want to read Hebrews 13:3 because I had not been exposed to this as much. But having Pete and our conversation of all that he's done in prison ministry, Hebrews 13:3 says, "Continue to remember those in prison as if you were together with them in prison, and those who are mistreated as if you yourselves were suffering." And I just get excited to see how much our givers support those in prison. They are people that need to be loved and cared about and treasured. And most often, the people in prison have recognized what has happened in their life and the choices that they've made. And for us believers to be able to show up and show them dignity, and that's where Pete, he put a business inside of a prison so that they could have jobs and learn that. It's just a really neat way to see all of this coming together of Scripture, people following that mandate, and just the ways that we can show dignity to one another.
Yeah, that support to prison ministries also goes to organizations that help kids and families with incarcerated parents. And so trying to help break some of the generational kind of cycles that happen. And it really is a beautiful thing of loving those behind bars and their families who are behind, who are on the other side.
We talked a little bit about the $2 billion that has granted out. I also want to touch on the $3 billion that actually was given into NCF. So over the 40 years that NCF has actually been in existence, the total number has now gotten to $26 billion, has flowed through the channels of NCF to the ministries. And it's so good sometimes just to look at the big number to see the faithfulness of God's people, because we at NCF are just a piece of their process of giving back to God's kingdom. So that $3 billion, it's amazing when you see that $3 billion came in, $2 billion went out. That's a huge number of actually getting those resources mobilized, as you talked about earlier, Eric.
Yeah. Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. This is the largest year of contributions ever. We've to see over $3 billion granted in to NCF, and there's still some more checks coming in here at year end, and so that number is going to still go up even a little bit more. Things that were sent prior to the year end and mailed, and so we'll continue to see that number grow. And what this excites me about is this is the powder in the keg to be deployed this year. So when we think about these numbers, last year the numbers were 2.2 billion in and 2.4 billion in and 2.2 billion out was granted out roughly, and so that was in the year of 22. So 2.4 came in, and of that 2.4, roughly over 2 billion of it was granted out this year. And so this next year, so as we look into 24, I'm thinking we're going to see a number closer to 3 billion granted out, which would be absolutely amazing. Of that, over 1.1 billion of those dollars were from complex contributions. So people who gave business interest, real estate interest, oil and gas rights, water rights, all these different things came in through complex asset gifts as well.
Right, because we at NCF, even though securities are a complex gift to others, we keep that as a separate account and don't count securities in that complex number.
Correct. Yeah. So if you add in the contribution of securities with our complex asset gifts, it's over 1.5 billion of that dollars. So half of the funds came in as complex assets into NCF.
Okay, so the tax accountant personality on this podcast is going to say, so 1.5 billion didn't pay capital gains tax on some of those assets. That's a really great thing for the charities getting more money.
Yeah. I mean, we continue to live in a country with the most generous tax law there is, and we are excited when givers leverage the tax law appropriately and use that to grant to charities. And so there are some organizations there's some people who like to, as I said before, like cast shade on donor advised funds. Well, it's not true for the NCF giver. The NCF giver is one who leverages it for the sake to be able to give more to the charities, and that's what you're seeing as we review this impact report this year.
And it's neat. It's just more and more people learning what is allowed, what we can do, what the law does. And we love those conversations. It's really fun to see and the assets that we hold is usually a lot more than just the cash that we're holding. So it is a lot of fun to see what people can do and their hearts. Eric, when I look at this whole report, I get so amazed. I go back to probably one of my absolute favorite themes in the Bible, and that's God's faithfulness. Because truly, what we're seeing is people just reflecting the faithfulness that they feel from God. Lamentations is 3:22 and 23 is a very, very well-known verse. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassion never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. And that's just where I just have had so much fun experiencing God's faithfulness and seeing it through our humble givers and their faithfulness into God's work.
Yeah. Seeing it's encouraging to our own souls to see God's faithfulness to individuals and their faithfulness to steward what God has entrusted to them. As we talk about here on the Generosity Now podcast about whole life stewardship. And, this is we realize that we talk often about whole life stewardship, the stewardship of your labor, your influence, your finances, and expertise. And what we're highlighting today is primarily just the finances aspect. We understand that that's not all that we steward, and we want to encourage people to. And actually, there's many hours of service that are dedicated behind the scenes, that volunteer hours, and there's expertise that's given where you listeners are on boards of organizations and are plugging in, and there's influence that you're exerting. And so this is just what fascinates me is this is just as big as some of these numbers are, it's just a microscopic impact of what the Lord has done in and through NCF givers around the world. And that is a beautiful thing too.
And those 35-ish thousand ministries, all of those people that are working for those ministries, and ministries' salaries have gotten better. They're not as bad as they used to be, but a lot of them are still sacrificially working many, many, many hours in this place to get the gospel to the ends of the earth. So I just look at all of that and go, I am just amazed to see all that God is doing.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned all of the earth. And one thing I want to bring it back to, the impact report, it highlights that over 195 countries are reached by NCF givers. And again, to the same idea that I just tried to say, we know that's not the actual number. Like the number is actually even larger. How many countries are there in the world, by the way? 263 or something like that, I think is the number, 253. It would not surprise me if that through the ministries that organizations fund, if all the countries of the world have been impacted or darn close to it. And so we know directly that 195 countries have been reached. But if you think about the impact of World Vision, of Compassion, of Children's Hope Chest, and organizations like that, there and many, many others. Look at that. All right. So thank you to Google. There are 195 countries in the world. So we should have just said, instead of 195 countries reached, that 100% of the world has been reached by the impact of NCF givers. To God be the glory.
To God be the glory.
Well, thank you, Google, and a quick search on that, Laurie. That well done. One of the organizations, and not every organization that's impacted through NCF givers has a U.S.-based 501c3, which limits their ability to be granted directly through a DAF. And so one of the organizations that NCF actually helped found is a group called TrustBridge Global. And NCF givers supported over $42 million to TrustBridge, which then is able to grant to organizations internationally where there's no U.S.-based 501c3. We're going to have Paul Bolte with TrustBridge Global on the podcast here in the coming year.
Yeah, it is amazing because there are many, many ministries that actually have a U.S. arm that the money can come to the U.S. and then be deployed through that arm. But these are actual dollars that go to entities that aren't anywhere in the U.S. And $42 million is an amazing amount of money of U.S. givers still being connected worldwide. Sometimes the world seems so small.
Yeah.
And then sometimes the world seems so big, but God creates that we're connected all across the world.
And beyond even some things that are in the report, and we're going to have some more conversations in the coming year this year on the Generosity Now podcast with organizations like Helping Hands and organizations like Helping Hands that help make granting to an individual in crisis happen. That was done in spades this year. It's absolutely a beautiful thing. There's also impact investing, which we talk often about. We're not capturing the impact of impact investing that givers did. So there are people that have fund balances that are also invested in organizations and businesses and nonprofits that have kingdom-minded practices in the work that they do. And there are also investments that are being done, which is also an amplification of the impact of the stewardship of these resources. And it's just an incredible thing.
Right, because all those impact investments are not grants. And so there's a lot of other investment into some of that with their charitable dollars that's happening behind the scenes.
Yeah. So we just wanted to take this time today and look back at this past year and to celebrate all that God has done in and through NCF givers. And at the same time, we want to encourage us all to continue to excel all the more. And so we will continue this conversation on the Generosity Now podcast. Tune in weekly as we start dropping these even more frequently this year. We'll probably take a couple breaks throughout the summer to give you guys a little break and give us a little bit of break. But we are so glad that you've been journeying with us. We'd love for you to continue to share and the Generosity Now podcast with others. We'd love for you to share about the ministry of NCF to others. If you have friends or family or co-workers that you think should be connected to NCF, we would be honored to steward steward those relationships. We have over 32 offices across the country. And so we here, Laurie and I in the Rocky Mountains are happy to facilitate connecting them to other offices. And so feel free to connect them with us. And it is our joy just to come alongside you. And I'm going to have Laurie do our doxology here. I know she had a couple other verses she wanted to share. And so, but I do want to remind you that on the Generosity Now podcast, we do seek to inspire, equip, and connect listeners for generous kingdom impact and whole life stewardship.
1 Peter 4:10 tells us, each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. And I am just so grateful for God's grace. I just pray that we can be encouragement as you guys are stewarding the gifts that God has given you.
Yes and amen. That's a good word. Thank you, Laurie.
Thanks, Eric.